Today we're recapping an American fantasy adventure film, Jungle Cruise. Spoilers ahead. Take a moment to imagine a magical tree that could cure illnesses, lift curses, a tree so powerful that its tears could heal a dying man. It's pretty insane, right? Well, it's crazy enough to get a certain Don Aguirre to grab a bunch of conquistadors and go in search of it. In 1556, Don Aguirre goes on an expedition to find this tree of life, and he does, but the tree's protected by a jungle too angry to be played with. The Don loses most of his conquistadors, but survives with a few and end up in a village filled with locals. After the village chief refuses to reveal the secret location of the tree, an angry Don decides to stab him and burn his entire village down. So the dying chief is pissed, and he curses Don and his conquistadors, making them unable to die and unable to escape the jungle. Jump a few centuries later, and England is knee-deep into the First World War. So deep, they listen to a Dr. Lily Houghton's brother talk about a magical tree with powers. The doctor's brother asks for an arrowhead artifact and an Amazon map, claiming it's all he needs in finding the tree. But the Society of Men happily refuse his request. Meet Dr. Lily Houghton, the female writer who wouldn't give up so fast. She breaks into the archives, steals the artifact, and makes her escape, in style if you asked. Here we meet another, drumroll wait for it, seeker of the tree, a Prince Joachim from a German royal family. Prince Joachim doesn't only try to get the artifact, he tries to kill Dr. Lily in the process. Excited for the adventure now, Dr. Lily and her brother, who we now know as McGregor, arrive in Brazil, where they find Frank Wolf, the best and most thrilling skipper in the world, according to him. If we choose to forgive his corny lines and cheap boat, Frank Wolf might just be the catch for a ride into the deadly jungle. But bad news, he's not ready to be eaten alive by this jungle despite the outrageous amount Lily's willing to pay. Just joking. He changes his mind as soon as he sees the arrowhead on her neck. At the same time, Dr. Lily and her brother have no idea they're being followed by Prince Joachim and his hired bandits, who are ready to end Lily's life. In a lucky fight, Lily and Frank escape the bandits, and with McGregor, they all sail into the jungle. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button and turn on that notification bell to get that full day of good luck. But Prince Joachim remains on their trail, following with a submarine that should be fighting the First World War. And after suffering a submarine accident, Joachim gets out of the race. Called the Tears of the Moon, the three musketeers set into the jungle with nothing but faith and a little bit of Frank's confidence. Now Lily considers herself a navigator, all thanks to her map of the jungle. She explains to Frank that her map offers a shorter route to the location of the tree, further adding that they could save 2 days of travel. Frank isn't happy about this, especially when you consider that he's the jungle expert. Come on, this guy offers trips to everyday tourists. Well, she paid him, and it's just natural that he does her bidding. Frank agrees to follow Lily's route, despite the inherent danger associated with it. However, just as they're about to leave, he orders his pet jaguar to steal the arrowhead from McGregor. Why? Well, you're about to find out. Frank takes Lily's route, and just as he predicted, the fierce water is about to get him. The siblings are thrown back and forth across the boat, and Lily definitely regrets her decision. Frank shows his skills, deftly moving the boat around the raging river, until they finally break through. Now eventually they arrive at a forest where McGregor and Frank chop wood. In the cabin, Lily's having a great time playing with fish and rechecking her map until she discovers pictures, research materials, and indication that Frank once tried to find the Tears of the Moon. Lily's surprised. She challenges the skipper and asks if a part of him still wants to find the tree. Nah, Frank says, I've given up on that long ago. After that's out of the way, the team is captured by Frank's fake Puka Machuna tribe. Initially meant to be a faux trick, Frank pulls for the passengers in the cabin. He forgets to cancel their performance, and they capture an irritated Lily and fearful McGregor. Frank now called off the performance, and this only goes to infuriate an already infuriated Lily. Talk about adding fuel to a burning house. She doesn't want to work with him anymore. and would rather go with a canoe into the jungle of the dead. But there's a good side to the story. Just hang on, Lily. Now, we discover that the tribal chief can read the symbols on the artifact. He says it shows the location of the tree. But there's a catch. The tribal chief will only do this if the chief gets Lily's hat in return. Unfair deal, but at least Frank would be off the hook. Now, the chief explains the tree will only bloom under a blood moon. Lily hopes to leave without Frank, as punishment for his expensive joke. The tribal chief suggests that she could get to the tree in 2 days. But Frank is confident she can't make it out there on her own. And did you forget about Prince Joachim? Well, wrong timing because he's still trying to find him. Only difference is that he finds the Don and his conquistadors from 1556 and frees them from the river. But here's something about getting free stuff from the devil. He takes away much more when you aren't watching. In return for the removal of the curse, Joachim asks Don and his conquistadors to find him the Tree of Life, an order which naturally pits them against Lily, Frank, and McGregor. Now, no longer in their real human form, Don and his conquistadors emerge as snakes and treemen, and they attack Lily and her team. Frank is stabbed in the chest, and he falls down for so long it feels like a movie of its own. The whole team is confident he's dead, because nobody would survive a stab and fall like that. Lily eventually escapes with the arrowhead, but at what price? Frank is stabbed, and her brother McGregor has a fracture in his leg. But when you consider all these could mean finding a leaf that cures all ailments, well, it could pass. So the next morning, surprise, surprise, Frank's alive. He reveals to a scared Lily and McGregor that he is actually 400 years old, and his real name is Francisco Lopez, one of the cursed conquistadors. How is that even possible? Well, Frank refuses to give an explanation, and he just says that it's complicated. But for him to continue on the adventure, Lily has to pull a sword out of Frank. Considering he's over 400 years old, there's no blood inside his body. It shouldn't be the most difficult task. Well, it turns out it still is. Meanwhile, the conquistadors find Prince Joachim, and they inform him of Frank's location, which of course includes Lily and the arrowhead. Confident that he's close to finding him, he changes course. Now back at the village, Lily and Frank continue the journey without McGregor, who without his leg isn't much good anyways. But this ends up being a real bad idea, as McGregor is captured by the evil Prince Joachim and forced to reveal the location of Lily and Frank. Now on the boat, Frank tells Lily his true story. He and Aguirre had been raised together like brothers. Aguirre had a daughter, Anna, who fell ill and couldn't be cured. Aguirre promised his daughter that he would travel far in finding a cure, and he did travel, with Francisco at his side. They fought the sea, fought the jungle, and even the Amazon River. Frank reveals that he drew the map Lily has been really protective of, causing her to call him a minor master of his time. Minor's a bit of an understatement. Anyway, back to the story. Frank explains that the jungle took almost all the conquistadors, and their lives were only saved when a nearby village appeared to their aid. The village chief, with his daughter, unlocked the powers to the tree and healed Aguirre and Francisco, showing us the healing powers of the Tears of the Moon. But they refused to give it to Aguirre. This naturally pissed him off, so he stabbed the chief and burnt down the village. Francisco's not happy with Aguirre's new tactic, and instead tries to protect the village by trapping the other conquistadors in a cave close to the river. Eventually trapped, they all turned to stone, and could do nothing to find the Tears of the Moon. So naturally, Francisco spent the next 400 years looking for the Tears of the Moon, looking for the arrowhead that led to its secret location. Must have been pretty hectic, 400 years alone, losing loved ones, friends, and pets. It would only make sense that Frank would choose to die as soon as he lifts the curse. Later on, the two end up at the La Luna Rota waterfall, and here they discover a temple buried under the water. It turns out to be the place Frank has been trying to find for 400 years. And they have no idea Prince Joachim is on his way to finding him. And to add to this, the two start an argument because Lily doesn't understand why he wouldn't want one more life. But cut the man some slack, it's been 400 years of doing nothing. Why would he want another life? Lily has a point though. She wants him to come to London and see the cars. And London's a beautiful city, especially in 1916. But one thing's evident, Lily has definitely fallen in love with her skipper. Despite her incessant complaints about his behavior, she wants him to go back home with her. But old Frank really just wants to die. He assures her that in spite of his search for the Tears of the Moon, he believes now without a doubt that the arrowhead rightfully belongs with Lily, and therefore the tree. Eventually, the Spaniards, the Germans, who are never late for a war, and Prince Joachim all arrive to disrupt this little romantic argument. The prince might have never discovered the location of Frank and Lily if he didn't kidnap MacGregor. Remember that MacGregor was left to stay behind because of his injured leg, and this proves to be a major mistake for Lily and Frank. Also, just after MacGregor shared the location of Lily and Frank, the prince killed off bees that had been sent from the conquistadors as messengers. Almost immediately after their arrival at the La Luna Rota waterfall, the prince and his cohort all begin fighting for the arrowhead, and eventually discover that it isn't actually a map, but instead contains a gemstone that could bring the tree to life. But just before the fight, Joachim's curious. Why does Lily want the Tears of the Moon so bad? It's not possible that she wants it for the scientific community, as they wouldn't even allow a woman to sit amongst them. He further explains that giving the masses that sort of power would be madness, as they wouldn't know what to do with it. Joachim, however, knows that he wants the Tears of the Moon. First and foremost, he said that he would win the war and then rule the world for generations to come. So now held hostage by Joachim and the soldiers, Lily and Frank are forced to place the gem and lock it into the trunk of the ancient tree, and a dormant tree suddenly blooms under the blood moon. But they don't do his bidding without first striking a deal. Frank asks that he is given a petal before he does anything, causing Lily to ask for the same thing. The prince is disgusted. He tells him he's willing to give him only one petal, and if fighting for it is the only answer, then so be it. Much to his surprise, Lily agrees to fight with Frank for the petal. The tree comes alive. It's magical. The myth is real. In an elaborate plan we don't know yet, Lily grabs a gun from one of the soldiers and shoots Frank. Then, she proceeds to get her one petal from the evil prince. Frank emerges, brilliantly beating the soldiers, and a large fight ensues. Unfortunately, the tree is dying due to the disappearance of the blood moon, but only one petal survives, which thankfully ends up in the hands of Lily. The Spaniards arrive to kill off Joachim because he betrayed him, and the remaining soldiers eventually drown to their death. Frank, in a bid to save the life of Lily during the fight, blocks the river with his boat and traps himself and the other conquistadors in the cave. But Lily has fallen in love with him, and she chooses to use the petal to lift his curse and restore his mortality. But nothing happens. Frank remains glued to the cave like a mannequin, not moving, not breathing. Proxima, his pet jaguar, stays behind, watching her master without life. But something slowly happens. Life magically crawls back into Frank, causing Lily and MacGregor to run into the cave. After he comes back to life, he gives Lily that one kiss we've been dying to see. Luckily for Lily, the tree blooms one more petal, which is just perfect for her research. So back in England with Frank, Lily is made into a full professor at the University of Cambridge, and the Royal Society, who rejected her research once, suddenly wants to listen. She chooses to reject the offer of the Royal Society, and instead becomes Frank's skipper around the beautiful city of London. Interesting information. Frank brings Proxima with him to London, and together they go on Frank's first attempt to drive a car. The perfect romantic ending. Except, we don't know what happened with MacGregor. Yeah, he goes back to the Royal Society to give them a piece of his mind. But we don't really know if he found love too. Really, we hope he did. This was a review for Jungle Cruise, which was produced by Walt Disney Pictures, and it featured Dwayne Johnson as Frank, Emily Blunt as Dr. Lily, and Jack Whitehall as MacGregor.